And good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me. This is our Road to the Midterms Thursday evening, where it's purely in-house. We're all family here, and we're going to be talking about the reality of what we're working to do to make it through the midterms. Now, I'm Andrea Miller, and a little bit about Center for Common Ground. We are based in Virginia. We are a 501c3, so that makes us nonpartisan. We run three main campaigns: Reclaim Our Vote. Actually, we run four: Democracy Centers, Vote Equality, and we have an internship program, Students for Justice. We are a tech house. We have just retired tax percent, but we still have vote force, and we will be using See Something, Say Something. And right now, we are doing civics education on federal and state legislation. Tonight, I'm going to update you on the Democracy Center project. I'm going to let you know where our texting project is. We're going to talk very briefly about the Virginia 2021 elections. And then Stephen Rosenfeld and I will have a discussion on the war on voting in the states. And Gabriel, if you're here, I may want you to, and or Josie, give us a quick update as to where we're going with those phone banks and advocacy alerts. So, Democracy Centers. We have one down in Hawkinsville, Georgia, and this is actually a photograph of the main folks that do the work in Hawkinsville. There's a team of five people. They do voter education and they teach African American history. They're going to start doing some postcards, and we're going to work on getting them going on trying out some of the advocacy. The Georgia State House has already passed the really, really bad bills, and the governor has signed it. So we're not really certain. I think they may have already gone home, or if they haven't gone home, they're going in a few days. So there may not be that much advocacy work that we can do directly in Georgia on state legislation, but we might come back to Georgia on some federal stuff, mainly to make sure people in Georgia have an understanding of what's going on in DC. Our newest, they did their first activity starting last week, is in Florence, South Carolina. They've done some work on COVID education. They have a whole series of webinars. Nancy will put that in the email. The photograph that you see here was they were launching and showing off their new clean drinking water system that they installed at the church. They had an election yesterday. It was a special election to fill a city council seat. If Reverend Leo is here, we'll see how that worked out because they ran a texting campaign for that election. Now, we are also talking about democracy centers in Alabama. In Alabama, we are talking to Omega Psi Epsilon. That is a fraternity, and they are very, very interested in partnering with us, and they have strategically selected locations in north, central, and southern Alabama. And they are connected to people in the other areas as well. And this would give them coverage from three centers of the entire state. They have a auspicious plan for handling voter education, voter registration. They really want to participate in the legislative civic education, and it looks as though they will be an absolutely amazing, amazing team. They've come up with a slightly different plan. There would be three leaders, but they also, because they are a fraternity, want to bring on 18 young people who will be working not only on their college campuses, but they will also be working in the nearby community. In Virginia, thanks to Christiane and Jen and Lorna and all their contacts. We have a great team of people that we are talking to in Richmond. We are talking with my pastor, and BJ was on the call about some real possibilities of getting things going in Roanoke, Virginia, that's Southwest Virginia, where not only are they fighting urban removal, they are fighting discrimination in public education and bullying. They are also fighting a pipeline on top of everything else. We are also talking to our friends in North Carolina. We are looking at possibly three locations to open up in the not too distant future, including a location in Robeson County on the Lumbee Reservation. Um, Texting will be back starting tomorrow. So we currently now have an instance of Spoke. If this works out as well as I believe it will, we will get our own private instance of Spoke, which we will be able to use for any and all of our campaigns. The first campaign that we are going to be working on, the one that is up, is one of the Georgia Rural Electric Cooperative campaigns. We're doing this for Juan Smith, where we are inviting member owners to come to a meeting to learn how they could lower their electric bills. So when we talk to voters in southern and or western states, we do have to realize that the concerns of voters are hyper local when there isn't an election going on. They now are back to the bread and butter issues of I work two jobs and I am really struggling to keep a roof over my head and paying my electric bill. So we are making sure that we are hearing the concerns and the pain of local voters. While we may not be able to fix it right away, we definitely want local voters to know we are there for them and we are part of whatever it is that they are going through. And then I will put that Spoke link in the chat a little while later. And then anybody that wants to text on this campaign, go ahead and click that link, and then you can go ahead and you can sign up. In this campaign, we are only texting from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we're shutting it off early. In case you missed it, there is a huge move afoot by the Federal Communications System to really begin making it very, very difficult for peer-to-peer texting to continue to be used for campaigns like this and possibly even political campaigns. That's one of the reasons why we shut down X%, and we are going with organizations where texting is all they do, so that they will have the time and the resources to devote to following where this goes legally. And if we need to seek legislative relief from Congress or executive relief from President Biden. So stay tuned. This battle has just started. And again, what kind of battle is it? Well, we did a lot of texting in a lot of states. We won a lot of states. And now people are trying to figure out how to shut us down. We already took a look at the annual report. I will put the link to the annual report in the chat if it's not already there. And then you'll be able to look at it. And now we are at my favorite part, where I get to talk with America's #1 premier writer who writes about all things voting. Who am I talking about? Of course, I am talking about the one, the only, Steve Rosenfeld. So, Steve, hello, good evening. I am so glad that you are here.
I have to be unmuted.
There you are.
Okay. Well, oh, Andrea, you're as these election lawyers always tell me, flattery will get you everywhere. And I should note, in the flattery department, you recently were recognized as being one of the 8 women who helped elect Democrats in Georgia, the presidency, and turned over the Senate, which is no small achievement, I might say, and everyone, of course, knows. So congratulations. And it's not just you, it's the way you've inspired people. And, and you've done it in a way that has kept it real, for people, and the consequences and the stakes. That's a rare thing in this political world, where everyone yells and screams and nobody knows what anything means anymore.
Well, Stephen, I think that's our job. I think it's your job to follow it and track it and write about it. And then I read what you wrote. And then I tell you what I read in the legislative directories and on the track bills. And then we both do some more research. And then I'm like, all right, this is what I think we're going to do. And then you look at what those results are. And again, it's very important at this time, when we're dealing with these state houses, to know and understand what winning looks like.
Yeah,
because we're dealing in many instances with trifectas, where the state, the Senate, and the governor are Republican. Winning looks like slowing them down, making them take the worst parts out of the bill, but they're going to get something passed.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is they are going to get stuff passed, whether this is Pennsylvania, whether this is Arizona, whether this is, you can go through the swing states, whether it will be vetoed, as would be the case in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, and whether there'll be end runs around vetoes, such as Michigan trying to go through the initiative process, something, it's like, let's not even get into the technicalities. It all remains to be seen, but slowing down is critical, because like one of the main things I'm noticing on this level is that these partisan Republicans don't understand election administration. They're trying to find red meat to throw to their base. So they're pushing for stuff that is, in some cases, not only will hurt their base, but may not be that significant. On the other hand, there will be stuff that will affect the people you care the most about. And I dare say, and this is really overlooked, in 2021, we're going to have a lot of local elections where we're going to see how these things play out. Georgia has all its mayoral and municipal elections. We will see how bad this bill is. So I've heard people defending the bill say, well, it's not going to be so bad, because these people pretend, okay, they think that everyone has a printer at home and you can just make a photocopy, and every senior citizen knows how to use a cell phone to make a copy, take a picture, and send it in.
Every senior citizen has a cell phone. What world are they living in? This is Georgia.
They're living in Atlanta, and and they're getting whispered in their ears from the Heritage Foundation. But because all of this stuff has to be where 97% of the registrations are tied to it, there may be fewer disqualifications if you get past that hurdle. So a lot of the garbage that Stacey Abrams supporters faced in 2016 may not be in play, but this is what happens. Instead, something else is in play. So how do you get past it? But every state has this, talk about like falling into rabbits. There's the Arizona rabbit hole, there's the Michigan, there's the Wisconsin, there's the Georgia, there's the Florida. But at the same time, the harder these Republicans keep pushing for crazy stuff, the more people in Washington at the federal level, and I mean Congress and the White House, I've never seen this, and I've covered federal elections since the 90s. NPR, Monitor Radio, which is Christian Science Monitor, some of the lefty websites, because you go where you can work. There's never been an energy in Washington where people feel it's in the air that something is going to happen. They have to do something. And so the question of course is, well, what's it going to be? Are they going to go big? Are they going to go small? And that's what's so interesting about this moment. And you should give us your thoughts on that. But this is really different about what's happening now. It's not like this talk is being ignored. It's, Biden, executive order on the anniversary Edmund Pettus Bridge March, endorsed House Bill 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would restore the stuff the Supreme Court gutted in 2013. He didn't commit to either. He just said all he's doing by ordering federal agencies to help people register to vote and give out voting information is the first step. So, well, what's the second step? We haven't seen him come to Congress and say, like Lyndon Johnson, we will overcome, but he's Biden, he's not Johnson. But this is the moment. Something is going to break. The question is, what will it be?
Well, and Stephen, I believe that as bad as this legislation is, and the fact that it's so prevalent, even Congress, where they often manage to live in the bubble that is Washington, D.C., and they're walking around going, these bills, this bad legislation, it is getting through to them. And I think they're looking at this has gotten so big, so ridiculous, so that while, yes, they're not beating people over the head with clubs and sticking dogs on them, literally, if we look at the end result, it would very well be the same thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, so we have in Georgia, the biggest corporations, basically Coca-Cola and Delta, saying, okay, we don't like SB 202. Think about the consumer boycotts in the early 60s and how much resistance there was. These people are on board right away. With less than a week since this thing was signed, they are saying it's not very good because they know that, in the 60s, the South learned that segregation was not good for business. And and it's not as if that dynamic has changed. But it's really, really remarkable. I asked a lot of people, do you want to compare the mood and the landscape of the country before the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 passed with today? A lot of people didn't want to do it. I'm talking about election scholars, people who usually love to just talk endlessly. One fellow who was really honest said, it's really hard to make the comparison because people forget what it was really like. And yet others are saying, like you hear the Georgia Democratic Party chair and others quickly drawing these analogies saying, oh my God, Jim Crow is back. It's Jim Crow 2.0. And, and I wonder, is it Jim Crow 2.0 or is it not? And actually, it's kind of a bad question. Journalists sometimes like to ask stupid questions where you create these yes, no answers. The sense I get is that the moral urgency to act is no different now than it was then. You know, Dr. King talked about the moral arc of the universe, and so it bends slowly, but every once in a while there's a spike where things happen fast, and that was 63, 64, 65, and that's now. I mean, it's no accident that while Ted Cruz in Congress is saying this is terrible, 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 we have George Floyd's trial, and you know, it's people notice this stuff. But then when we talk about, well, what is the solution for the bad stuff that we're seeing in all these state bills, it's kind of an open question to me. You know, I can't get answers by people who actually will tell me specifically that if you have the John Lewis bill that revives the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which forces every state to go to the Justice Department and say proactively, is this okay? Will you approve this? If that would stop the bad stuff, or if we need to do everything else. And HR 1 and Senate Bill 1 is every proposal that has been on the shelf that Democrats have wanted to put into law for a dozen years. I mean, come on, it's you know, the Republicans have been very effective. They've incrementally did this, voter ID, they did that. But now we have the Democratic wish list, you know, and this is the way politics works. You know, you have the power, you use it, or sometimes you don't.
Right. And what normally happens for Democrats is they generally try to go smaller. They are easily frightened by this is too big, so they back down to something very incremental, and then it turns out not to be enough.
Right. This is what is so curious. You know, just because these, like, think about this from the Republican side, a lot of the crazy stuff, and I'm being polite when I say stuff, that is in these bills, may not only not work as advertised, it may backfire. But, you know, on the progressive side too, you know, we may hope that, you know, something we want to do that's inclusive will work. And all of a sudden it doesn't work as hoped or promised or advertised. And that's because elections are so damn complicated. And that's by intention, of course. So the question really becomes, what's the smartest approach we can take? And you know, and it's so interesting. I mean, the work that you did and all these people did with that you have supported and support you, it kind of was under the radar because it was being so damn focused on, like, you know, elections they're like military operations. And I'm not a military guy. You know, but you have to look at all the decision points and make the right decision and tell people how to make the, you know, to turn that corner. And a lot of the people out there don't do that, but you folks really did. And which I think is why you were been so successful. But that is sort of the challenge now in these new laws. Like, are we paying attention to stuff that doesn't matter? Or is this really an inflection point? You know, can voter riders help the folks in Georgia get this stupid ID thing in the mail if 60% of the people you contact are going to vote with mailed out ballots? Or how do you do it? You know, and maybe in these low turnout elections, you know, these mayoral and county elections this year, not 2022, can you get enough people to actually get on those city councils and boards of education so they're just not a bunch of old white guys, you know, telling a majority, you know, Black and brown community how to raise their kids and whether or not there'll be computers in their schools, and on it goes.
And that's part of what I love about elections. And that's also part of what I love about our democracy center concept. There's a really basic rule about elections that my uncles told me years and years and years ago. And they basically said, elections are all about the numbers. It's not about who believes what. It's all about who gets their voters out to the polls. That's what it ultimately boils down to. Who gets their voters out? So these two guys were turnout masters. That is what they did. That was their job as aldermen. And so I look at elections very much like this, that ultimately the goal is to win the prize, to win the election, to win the power. But most people, when they talk to low information voters, they don't talk to voters about power. They just talk to voters as voting, as though voting is just this flat, totally empty, completely esoteric thing, and it's not going to change your life at all. And so people go, well, if it's not going to change my life, why should I do it? You should do it because it can change your life if you go at it the right way. I voted for you. This is what I want. I'm looking at how you're voting. You didn't do what I want. I need to get somebody else. We're going to go get another guy or gal. That's how people have to look at elections. And that's the goal of the democracy centers, to give people that view. We are powerful people. We elected you either by voting for you or not voting for you. There will be another election and we will remedy this situation. We have the power.
Yeah, it's a remarkable moment. I mean, a lot of the people on this call, and some who grew up either as kids in the 60s, or they were in their teenagers in the 60s, or their kids are on this call, and they've discovered politics, through whether it's Bernie and the Black Lives Matter movements and whatever. And it's just that we're in a moment, which is an unusual moment in history, where things are poised to turn if people have enough political will. The moral imperative is there.
Right.
No Republican. This is astounding. When Lyndon Johnson, after he became president, after Kennedy's assassination, he picked up Kennedy's civil rights bill. And what was in that bill? And this is 1963, a year before the next presidential election. What was in that bill? It was ending segregation in public settings. We're talking about the lunch counter, the stores, the government offices, the buses. So he pushed it through against his own personal history, which the point I'm trying to make here is there is no Republican I'm seeing in the Senate or the House right now that is willing to rise to that level of statesmanship. Now, I'm not saying statesmanship is pure. I'm not saying there weren't competing interests. I'm not saying there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And then that was signed in 1964. So that November, the South, the 5 most southern states, the exception was Virginia and North Carolina, went for Goldwater. Johnson won in a landslide, but it was the beginning of losing the South. After that, a couple of years later, Nixon, it was his Southern strategy, law and order, and code words, states' rights. So then he didn't stop there. He was expanding the Vietnam War as John Lewis was marching across the bridge in Selma. And he didn't want to hear, you're dealing with this race, you can't deal with this racism and stuff at home. What are you talking about? Democracy and defeating communism abroad? He had to do something. He was forced by the moment to pretend or do something or pose as something heroic. So we had that famous address to Congress ending in the King, we shall overcome, which is insanely emotional for anyone who knows. And people were, the violence today, the racial violence today it's more police brutality. It's not stopping people from registering to vote. Think about this, registering, that's the starting line. It's not disqualifying voters. It's not disqualifying ballots. It's not curing signatures. Right. It's just getting your, and so the thing was, again, what happened was, when he told his attorney general designee to create the strongest federal enforcement mechanism ever. And what it was it forced these covered jurisdictions to come to the federal government and say, we have this change in law or a rule, which is an administrative thing, and approve it. Right. And it didn't force the feds to go looking. The lawyers who wanted to go prosecute these cases, they couldn't win, because the standards in case law, where you had to prove what's in the minds of the accused.
Right, and you can never prove what's in anybody's mind. Right, that was the bridge too far. But
Yeah,
if
so
they
yes,
have to
this is what,
say, we want to do this. Oh, really? You do? Well, when we look at what you want to do, these are the consequences. So, no.
right. So what I'm trying to get at here is, they changed the whole basis in law for how you like judge and say no. And that's what the John Roberts took out of in 2013 of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
So here we are today. And like, where are the politicians who know they are losing support for their party, saying, I'm going to lose support for my party, but it's better for the country. So Johnson knew this before the 64 presidential election. He still won. He still did this in 65 with the vote. Where are the Republicans? I'm hearing not a single Republican is going to vote for anything that, relates to this, which is, I mean, these are the people who like are retiring. What do they have
Right.
to lose? Roy Blunt, Toomey? What do they have to lose?
Right. I had an interview with Senator Burr's office, and we were talking about the For the People Act, and they didn't like the voting rights part. And so I talked about the fact that the For the People Act sets the baseline standard. I said citizens in North Carolina enjoy early voting and you enjoy no excuse absentee voting. This is America. It is supposed to be democratic and it is supposed to offer equal opportunity. Well, obviously, the opportunity is not equal when there are states that don't have early voting and do not have no excuse absentee voting. That is not equal. And they had
Yeah, well,
nothing
I don't,
to say.
I don't. Yeah, right. Because this is what is so crazy by lines that are opaque and they are not new. This was astounding to me. I was really researching this, what is it like today compared to the early 60s? Well, the historians of the South and segregation in the South, they were talking about a disenfranchisement movement in the late 40s. That's how it was labeled by V.O. Key, who wrote the magisterial history of the South based on 500 interviews of people in power. Anyway, we're at this moment that is really unusual in our lifetimes and in American history, and it really remains to be seen. And it's really happening in a very bifurcated fashion. The more bad stuff at the lower levels in the states, the more impetus there is to act at the federal level. How this plays out, we would just have to see.
I'm writing, yes, I agree. Stephen, if you could put the link to your article where people can read your article. I loved that article. That was incredible. Put that in chat. And Gabriel, you are still
Yep.
here. Gabriel, phone banking, where are we? What are we up to? Who are we calling?
Hey, sorry, I was in the other room.
Oh,
I
sorry.
heard you.
I've got a big voice.
Yeah, so we're focusing. Oh, 1 second, I have to close the door so I don't hear my voice in the other room.
Oh,
So we're focusing in on Arizona pretty hardcore right now, since the Georgia legislative period has ended. And we're looking at 3 specific bills. They're all voter suppression related. We have 1106, 1713, and last but not least, 1485, which we had a bit of a scare today because it looked like they were going to try and pass it through the committee of the whole, which is, for those of you who are not familiar, 1485 is the PEVL Purge Bill, PEVL standing for Permanent Early Voting List. And basically the one person, the one state representative that we have been focusing everyone in on is the one Republican holdout that is successfully preventing this bill from passing. And we it's not a definite thing, but this bill keeps almost passing, and then he's not quite ready to pass it. And so we're going to keep focusing in all of these calls on him. His name is Representative Joel John. And today was like a minor victory in this big, long stretch of time. And the goal is just to keep it going. And people were talking, you know, we're in contact with One Arizona and a whole collection of groups, of voting rights groups called the Arizona Voting Rights Coalition. We're taking direction from them on who to contact. And they were all pretty upbeat today, because they were saying they would not have been able to dream that they could stall these bills from passing for so long if you had told them like a few months ago. So it's very encouraging. We are absolutely, like, we're changing it day to day. We're updating all of our information day to day. Maybe Josie can talk a little bit more about these bills in detail or where they are. But yeah, it's looking encouraging, and your calls are making a huge difference. We're making more patch through calls than any of these other Arizona-based organizations. So congratulations.
Yes, and that is because Gabriel and the phone banking team, you folks are the most awesome phone banking team ever.
Thanks, Andrea. Got one hell of a team.
You sure do. Josie, are you at your computer?
Yes, I am at my computer. I am happy to give a breakdown of all three bills. They basically are all in the same place as well. So all of these bills had originally passed the Arizona Senate and are now in the Arizona House, waiting for their third vote, floor vote. And they're all going to go back to the Senate because they have been amended quite a bit. 1106, for example, is a big striker bill that will now make it a felony to vote out of state. If you're so temporarily not living in Arizona, like a college student, it would be a felony for you to vote in Arizona. That one's weird, and the coalition, they don't really know where Republicans or anybody stands on this bill because it's so new, at least this version of it. 1485 is a big Pebble purge, where if you don't vote in 2 consecutive elections, you will be purged from the Pebble voter list, which already puts over 100,000, if not more, voters at risk.
It's 200,000.
200,000?
Yes.
200,000.
Yeah.
A lot of voters for no good reason. And then 1703 is a lovely voter ID law that actually was amended, in my opinion, not for the better, because now it would only make driver's license or voter ID a possible, like the only forms of eligible voter, like ID identification to vote absentee. This means it excludes tribal ID, for example, which is really not great. A lot of people don't have driver's licenses, and I myself do not know where my voter registration or my voter ID number is, for example. Yeah, that's a quick overview. I will post the 2 letters that we have on Ignite Advocacy in the chat. They are only for folks that live in Arizona, but if you know people that live there, please have them share them. Yes, if you have any questions, feel free to just message me.
All right, thanks a lot, Gabriel, Josie. We are also, because Georgia is going home, we are looking at what is going on in the great states of Texas and Florida, which have a number of really bad voter suppression bills. I need to give you a link so that, let me go to, here we are. If we are in the process of putting up a new website, I promise I will get the website switched over tomorrow. If you go to the link that I just put in the chat, that's our Take Action link, you'll be able to see a map, and on that map, you'll be able to go to any state and see what laws do they have that are bad laws that are suppressing the vote. And hopefully the drop down's working now, and you can go to the drop down and see what are the good laws. It was really our original goal to be able to lift up the voter expansion bills, but the voter suppression bills, there were so many, they were so oppressive. We ended up not really having a choice, and we had to fight against the bad bills and never really got the opportunity to lift up the good bills. I like that North Dakota passed a bill to make it easier for college students to vote. Yay, North Dakota. We don't see nearly enough bills that do that. Yeah, it's your students' printable document, institutions, self-service, and they can use that to document their voting. Excellent. One of the reasons we see things like that in states like North Dakota, and we don't see it in states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, is North Dakota is a state that's very homogenous. There are not a lot of people of color in North Dakota. Now, interestingly enough, it would be interesting to see if all these laws are also going to apply to the tribes, because there are tribes living in North Dakota. But in the South, that is where we find a very, very large community of color population, Black, Hispanic, and after the Vietnam War in Alabama, a fairly large population of Vietnamese. So it's very, very interesting looking at these states. You can almost tell who is really going to be working hard to suppress the vote. So Steve was talking about Jim Crow, and I basically say, well, what we have moved into in the 21st century is we have James L. Crow, Esquire. So it's no longer the country bumpkin Jim Crow, with a bat and a club trying to keep people from voting. It's now basically a well-educated lawyer using the law to stop people from voting. Ultimately, we end up achieving the same goal. We've made it much harder for people to vote. I'm going to open it up for questions. Again, we're family, so I'm having a good time. You can just unmute yourself and shout out, or you can raise your hand, whatever you want to do. Oh yeah, I do love that. Yes, we have the Koch brothers and Alec. The Georgia bill that passed SB 202 literally went down the GOP election confidence task force wish list, including they are criminalizing giving food and water to people standing in line to vote. But they didn't get the biggest item on their list. They could not get rid of no excuse absentee voting. Our phone calls, our emails drowned them out. We made such a stink that it was a bridge too far for them. They gave up. Oh, and yes, and we could tell it was an ALEC bill because when I read the Georgia version, there was a section of it where they forgot to replace Iowa with Georgia. So it was a bill mill. Anybody else? Otherwise, Alice, go ahead. Unmute.
Okay, there it works.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to talk about the student bills that are out there, because one of the forms of repressions, example New Hampshire, is to try not to let students who are out-of-state students who are going to college in a particular state to register to vote, which is exactly the contra of what Arizona is saying. Arizona is saying, if you're born in Arizona, but you're going to college in New Hampshire, you can't vote in Arizona. New Hampshire's saying, if you're an Arizona student who's come to New Hampshire University, you can't vote in New Hampshire. So that child wouldn't be able to vote in either state.
Right,
So
wouldn't be able to
Stephen-
vote anywhere. So
Anyway.
again, yes, New Hampshire, their little war on students saying that you cannot use the university as the address for residents. Like what? They're like, if you go rent an apartment and become a real resident, but if you're just here as a student, go away, no. And again, I really think laws like that really, really help to show the criticality of moving the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act forward.
And
So,
I just wanted to reiterate that we have the National Voter Registration Act, which passed in 1992, I think, whatever year it passed, and it has a uniform standard for federal voter registration, but there is no national voting rights standard for who can vote, and that's what S1 really does in a very simple way, is to set the standard to allow people to vote. And I think we have to go to every single corporation and start boycotting any corporation that is based in a state that has voter registration laws that are repressive, and say, we're not going to use you because you're not doing anything to stop this.
right, right. And there was and thank you, Alice. There was a note in the chat from Josie. One of the bills, let me grab the chat, HB 429 that we were tracking exactly, that has died in committee. So yay. Bridget. Go ahead. There you are.
Hi. I just wondered if it's kind of maybe overkill, but some of us like to know the parallel existing law for every law that is being proposed, every bill. So in other words, what was it like in that state, and how are they tweaking it to take away that right that existed before? Just so we could talk more intelligently to people if they are wondering, well, what's the big deal about asking this or that? We could say, well, before it was this way and it was more inclusive. Is there any informational site, or do we prepare anything where it clearly compares the existing laws to how that would change?
Now, what we did in Georgia was we called voters who had voted by mail and told them that Georgia was attempting to end no excuse absentee vote by mail. So people were like, wait a minute, and then we were saying Georgia has had no excuse absentee voting since 2005. So this is not new. It's not something that they did as an emergency law because of the pandemic, and now they don't like it. They've had it since 2005.
Yes, like that kind of information is really rich. And so I just wondered, because I know we have the list at the end of our scripts and at the page that we can connect to about what the laws are being proposed, but I just wondered what, like your example, do we have it anywhere, or we just go to Slack and kind of try to figure it out that way?
We generally, because things move through state legislatures so fast, it's normally all we can do to get the alerts written that this bill is going to be in committee, call and say no. So we really don't have the time and or the staff to do the research in terms of what is the existing law and what are people doing in that state now. As I said, Georgia was easy because there were so many articles about how long things have been in Georgia, and the Atlanta NAACP came in with a lot of backup information. We don't have the equivalent of an Atlanta NAACP in all the states. So we're hoping that we'll have it in some, but Stephen, and I'm going, oh, Stephen's going, oh no, she's going to be bothering me about
No.
doing
Actually,
stuff.
I'd like to, let me tell you where my sources are, okay? Because I see in the chat the Brennan Center. The Brennan Center likes to give examples that support their litigation. And sometimes they're not the full picture. And I say that regrettably. I go to two places. I go to the National Council on State Legislatures and I go to Ballotpedia. And because even though they won't have the short-term histories that Andrea is talking about, they basically break things down by category of voting and by what step you are in the process. And it lists, first of all, it lists all the state laws that were there. But for example, with all the COVID changes, Ballotpedia did this amazing thing where they had this daily digest of all the updated election laws. And so I do think that, that kind of history is there. The problem with this is that every state is different and it's too much information. It's really overwhelming. And it's overwhelming for me. And I've been like doing this for years and years, and it's overwhelming for you all. But that's where I go. And I wish it was simpler. I do think that, Andrea has a really good trained eye. So for example, when you see these things that are being rushed through and someone doesn't cut and paste Georgia instead of Iowa, you get a sense of what's really going on. And that is what is really going on. But still, that's where I go for baseline stuff. It's better than sometimes the Secretary of State web pages, which can be very opaque, and they can drown you in too much legalese. So I'll just leave it there. Those are the
Yeah, a lot of legalese and very little reality.
Right.
All right. We are right at the hour, and I got my beer late for happy hour, and my beer is starting to get warm. It was fun having a lovely meeting with just family and friends on tonight. So I'm going to give everybody a big shout out and a big thank you. Oh, let me give you the link to, I'm always losing the darn thing. Here's the link to our annual report. If you have not seen it yet, I will paste the PDF in the Slack channel. I want everybody to have a wonderful, wonderful night. And I was going to give anyone who wanted to text for us the link to sign up to text. So let me paste that in. And if you want to text for us using Spoke. Thank you all for saying congratulations to me. This evening was just so fun, so memorable. I will never forget this. This was wild. So everybody, I love you all because you're my peeps. Take care.